Hello. Uh, Welcome to another, I guess this will have to be categorized as Northstar Talk politics, even though this video is not primarily political. I think, diverge enough into politics a little bit with what I've got planned here that it might just barely be best to call it that so folks don't get turned off by the appearance of any politics and something that's not primarily political. Um, I I guess this could be considered partly a social reflection on society, and that's where it touches on politics. What got me thinking was reading a review of a game I love, or like my issues with it, Citizen Sleeper, which is actually a game I've been doing a Let's Play series on. And someone was talking about how the game railroads you, tells you what your character thinks, feels in a situation, how they respond, and I had mixed feelings about this review. It did get me thinking. On one hand, there's the whole issue of people telling other people how they feel or such, and authoritarianism, but I don't think that's the approach this guy was on. I think the bigger issue um, was that a lot of people play these games that kind of have a role playing element, and they expect the characters to be them, even though they've never had the experience of, for instance, escaping from literal slavery, which is what the character in Citizen Sleeper. You're like a robot that's actually a copied human brain. You've been uploaded from, you're born human and sold yourself into slavery, basically. It's not even clear how much you got paid for it, or if it was like a desperate, you were gonna starve otherwise situation, um, and put to work in literal mines. So that's not an experience most people have had, unless maybe you came from like the third world and there's some, well, not technically legally slavery. People there are reduced to working for starvation wages for foreign owned corporations that work with like local corrupt governments and warlords sometimes even. And that's basically slavery. But I doubt that guy or most people have had that experience. Instead, I think the issue was an inability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, understand other people have different feelings, different perspectives, which is a pattern I've noticed a lot in our society. Um, Sometimes this gets, hold on, the audio is muted, but I don't think it was affecting my speaking here or being recorded since I was seeing. Sometimes that affects like political empathy and stuff. Often affects people's personal relationships. I do know that studies have shown levels of this often trends into psychopathy, or I think that's the correct term, not sociopathy. I always mix the two up. And the United States has reached record levels, like more than 1 in 4. Um, I think total, or maybe it was more than 1 in 4 men in the United States, which should be 1/8 of the population, though there's also female psychopaths. So, um, and of course, that does can't be genetic. Evolution, genetic drift just don't occur that quickly unless there's extreme selection pressures. Well, they can happen surprisingly quickly, but this isn't like less than one generation. A lot of the uptick, and I mean, like, not less than one. I guess a single generation. But it's the time span is actually less than, like, it's been 40 years. I guess people do have kids less than that, but it's very short. And there's so many other selection pressures. It's undoubtedly not genetic, which means it's upbringing and society and culture. Um, it's not like parents suddenly decide to start doing a terrible job raising their kids, so it has to be the culture. It has to be the messages we get about how to treat each other and being atomized increasingly. This actually goes into my socialist views, and the Marxist theory said for a long time that capitalism will atomize people and teach them a lack of empathy for other human beings. And this seems to be exactly what's occurring according to statistics, because psychopathy is fundamentally a lack of empathy. It's a lack of the ability to understand that other people have different views and perspectives than you and are separate human beings who are just as valuable and important as you are. I see that a lot. And then this touches on, I guess, the final kind of thing that plays into this, or one of the final, um, my own experiences. I have long COVID. I'm disabled. I'm too sick to work. Well, I'm still have a lot of what you might call crystallized knowledge, and I'm still intensely curious, so I do pick up stuff about the world, even though I learn slower than I used to before I long COVID. I have trouble processing new information. I have memory issues, and I have trouble focusing. I tend to speak in a very disjointed manner. It's almost like ADD or something. Thanks to long COVID, that was never like that to this degree. It was always a little less focused than most people, but nothing like this until I got sick with this disease, which came from a viral infection, from a COVID infection. For those who aren't familiar, long COVID comes, you get a COVID infection, and then instead of getting better, all these like weird new symptoms start to develop after you clear the virus. Like, 2 weeks, a month later, and suddenly you start getting difficulty focusing. If you didn't have it while you were actively ill with the virus, you start having extremely low energy. Or in my case, I had it while I was sick with the virus. It just never went away. In fact, got worse. You get all like weird GI issues, aches, pains, rashes. It's a bad disease. It does leave me too sick to work. What would be considered any meaningful, productive work, according to government definitions, does mean I'm disabled. And yet, I have to scrounge, struggle to survive, not treated with empathy or dignity or respect. I cannot get in the United States by the standard rules, and apparently bureaucrats have some ability to make exceptions to these rules, but it's not stated anywhere on any official website. I had to hear that from a bureaucrat who used to work for one of these agencies, who says, "Oh, well, we can just, if they want, they can make exemptions to some of these rules, but the state rule says I can't get Social Security insurance, supplemental security insurance, SSI, because I have more than $1,000 in assets in the bank, which is a ridiculously low threshold. With rents these days, you can't even make a month's rent for $1,000 in a lot of places, and certainly not a month's rent plus having an emergency fund for like unexpected medical expenses or car repairs or anything like that. You're allowed to no more than $1,000 in the bank, ownership of a car, and ownership of a house if you have one, which is funny because obviously if you have a small house, the mortgage is a lot less than if you pay to rent. That's a huge asset, and you're allowed to have that, but you can't have $1,500 in the bank. It's insane. So I can't get SSI, which only pays I think $900 a month. Instead, I'm only eligible by stated rules for a state welfare program, which I won't give the exact amount because I don't need to be doxing myself if there's fascists lurking on the internet. But it's less than half that amount what I can get in my state. Um, Less than half that amount. It's not enough to pay rent anywhere. It's not enough to live on, which forces me to live with shitty, borderline abusive, or actually abusive family. Um, May not be strongly in the abusive range of things I experience, but I definitely get treated very poorly. And it's close to that range if it's not just over the border into it. Uh, I, I would very much like to be on my own, but I wouldn't be able to afford rent anywhere. And even if I could find somewhere, it'd be a tiny postage stamp of like probably a room rented in a house kind of situation, where in a like a slum, it'd be a very bad living condition. I'd lose my mind because I'd be completely isolated, living on my own in a tiny apartment. I'd barely have room to move around in. That would probably be filthy in a dangerous part of town, noisy. Like the way the rent would be that low is if there's a lot of things that make it lower than normal. It's impossible to live on, and the government knows this, and they can consciously fuck over people with disability, considering their survival to not be important enough to put more money into even the state. And they only provide this because the federal government is so full of loopholes that, and in fact, if you later qualify the federal program, they make the you quote reimburse them, but just kind of your money, the federal government will back pay the supposedly, unless they're lying about how that works, and then suddenly I get a check for thousands of dollars that they're paying out because I suddenly qualify for the federal program. I doubt that, but I've been told that's not what that means. Um, I really should consult a lawyer about that, but where I'm going to get legal aid that doesn't, even the free legal aid people like won't help with stuff most of the time. I tried to get their help with my school because they didn't have a retroactive withdrawal policy, so I got long COVID. They were automatically failing me on my last couple classes. I needed to graduate when they could have just let me withdraw. So if I ever got better, if there was ever a cure, I could just come back and have an easier time finishing without hurting what was my perfect 4.0 GPA and a very, very, very difficult high level grad program. So I had worked incredibly hard for that, partly because I was older. I was a student returned to school after working for a while. I did not want to be stuck where I was in life. I was trying to become a physician. Instead, I had been treated very poorly. So I screwed over repeatedly after I finished my first in grad school with a master's degree, where the program was shutting down. I barely got that before they closed the doors. So there was no question like I could go on to a PhD or something because the program didn't exist anymore. And they didn't tell people this till I was already in the program. Uh, so after I finished that program, which I barely got through because my first lab ran out of money and shut down, I had to find another one in a hurry, which delayed my graduation almost caused me to run into even the program not existing anymore for the masters. And there's no way I could, like, as I said, then do a PhD because there was no program to transition out of anymore or anything, or just gone. And that was due to state funding cuts because it was a state university, but in a major research university. I'm probably saying too much because there's only a few state universities that are really good at research in the sciences. But um, after that, I got stuck in a rural area in the Midwest because I couldn't afford to move to a major city because I had the money saved up because I've been frugal and not borrowed as much as student loans because I've been raised by family who determine much of your early life views to be very, very conservative about debt. And had heard terrifying things in the news about people never getting out of student loan debt, so I borrowed as little as I could. Even when I worked in school, I just put that into borrowing less loans, and I didn't have the assets. I didn't have the money in the bank. Not very much as small. I think I had like 1,600 in the bank or less when I graduated. Not enough to afford to move to a big city where rent's like 1,000 or 800 a month, and you need first, last, security, and broker's fee. So it's like $3,000 you need just to move, and you need a few more months. And I didn't have that. Maybe it was 3,000 in the bank. I know it wasn't much. I could have had more. I could have borrowed more. I didn't borrow up to student loan limits by any means. And even though I lived very frugally, I said I just borrowed even less, as little as I could. So for my supposedly what society calls financial wisdom, in order to blame the victim when students end up with massive student loan debt, oh, you borrowed too much. I borrowed very little and I got stuck in a rural area, and I got stuck, and this is the final piece of the puzzle, having just talked to a friend recently about how he's working nights, and the research in that shows working nights, which I ended up doing at this point, is terrible for your health. It leads to heart disease, stroke, car accident deaths. And we're not just talking while you're working. Like, you can work nights in your 30s and increase your chance of dying of heart disease in your 60s because plaque formation occurs. Actually, the very earliest, what are known as fatty streaks, show up in your early 20s, but by the 30s, plaque formation is really starting to snowball in your arteries. I mean, the damage that leads to heart disease, heart attacks when you're 60, 70, that started decades earlier. It's just been building for a long time. It's a lifetime bad choices or choices they're forced on you by society. It wasn't a bad choice to work nights. I was forced to do it. It was the only way I could survive. I had a very, very crappy job, paid minimum wage, and then got an offer for a slightly better job. Um, well, two things. I had a very, I got off. I was scrounging for all of the jobs. I got offered two jobs at once after a long period of being told I was overqualified or just not even called back for jobs in this rural area. Well, yeah, I'm overqualified, but I can't go where there's jobs in my field, so I'm stuck here. I guess employers feared, probably correctly, that the moment I had money saved up, I would leave the rural area and they'd be out of an employee, so they just weren't going to hire me. But when it became obvious I was desperate enough, then suddenly I got two job offers that would have started the same week. So I tried to do both jobs, and that meant instead of taking the offer position one job, taking a lower down the chain job, which was minimum wage instead, which the one I was offered, they then later eliminated that position less than a year later. So if they'd hired me, they probably would have gotten rid of the position, laid me off like some number of months in, which would have sucked. So I worked two jobs, but the other one that paid much better was seasonal. It ended. They brought me back because they liked me so much, but then that would go do that once for another seasonal thing that was gone. Uh, I was desperate working this shitty minimum wage job, and the job position they could put me in didn't even exist anymore, or they knew it wasn't going to exist anymore at that point. And then soon was eliminated. So I took another job in the area, but it interfered with the first one mostly, which they at least brought me to full time after the other job ended. Originally, I was working evenings. That having shifted my schedule around first to full time, then back to a lower number of hours again. And the other job, which was paying me under the table and not paying to my Social Security tax, which has caused issues today with Social Security fucking me over, saying I don't have the work history for Social Security disability, even though I do. But there's jobs that like this that apparently weren't reporting to the Social Security Administration, and others that there's one job that only has my very last paycheck for some reason, nothing before, and they say you can't correct errors more than 40 months after the fact. What the hell? It's not like in my 20s I was checking their database to see if they had the correct information, which they didn't. Um, so job is fucking me over and paying me on their table. I asked too many questions about that. I kept bugging to find out I wasn't seeing any like tax withholding, and they made an excuse and got rid of me because they were cheating on their taxes, and I was figuring it out. And then in order to get back to full time, so I could pay rent on this other job that was still minimum wage, they put me in nights, and that brings me to the health issues of nights and the fact that people get taken advantage of, exploited, and capitalism loves this shit because when people are desperate, they can exploit them, make them do whatever they is needed to maximize profits. They don't care if they're giving someone heart disease from working nights. They don't care if someone invested a ton of effort in trying to do well with their lives, going to grad school and stuff, and has a degree and has a pile of student loan debt. That only makes someone more desperate if they've got all that debt and are driven to succeed that much. They care about, and by they I mean the people, the ruling class these days, the billionaires, the people, though often who are highly connected with them. They're just kind of a para-ruling class of like people in the media who rub elbows with billionaires and they're not billionaires themselves. Um, my mom personally knows one of those people, and that's what she thinks. She knows everything that's happened in the country. It's like, get a clue. This person is lying to you. No, they don't have something up their sleeve to get rid of Trump or any of this nonsense. You think this is just you being gullible and falling for someone whose literal job is to propagandize people, because the people, the ruling class, kind of keeps at their fringes and includes in sharing power to not wealth with are people high up in the media, in government offices. The actual politicians often become millionaires very quickly through insider trading tips that they're given. It's just illegal, but it happens all the time, from like insider trading and speaking fees and book deals where some billionaire buys 10,000 copies of their book, or rather, the billionaire has a think tank that buys 10,000 copies of the book that the think tank sponsored the writing of, so that the politician could essentially get bribed to do something that the billionaire wanted. This has been going on for a long time. It's getting worse. But politicians, bureaucrats, people high up in the police, military, and media are often included in kind of the ruling class, but they're not filthy rich. But they enable the filthy rich to hold power, and that's what capitalism is, and how our system of government works when it's an oligarchy and not real democracy, and hasn't been for a long time. In the 1920s and 30s, there was this guy, Smelly Bower. He ended up writing a book, I forget it was in the 20s or 30s, called War is a Racket. And it's about this. It's about from more the military people, rebels, but there's also about the media and the big banks. It's included in the book to some degree. Um, this is also the era where in the early 30s there was an attempted plotted fascist coup against FDR. Would have taken effect before he actually took office during the lame duck period of what was it, Hoover, um, Harding Coolidge Hoover, yeah, Hoover. Um, that would have this was known as the business plot, and then because the billionaires in today's money who had plotted this, multi-millionaires back then, but inflation, um, billionaires who applauded this also owned the media. So they had all the media outlets they owned go and say, oh, it was a joke. It was never serious. It was never that big a deal. So no one got thrown in jail for it. Even this guy, Smelly Butler, the most decorated United States Marine Corps officer in history at that time, and I think still, like medals of honor, all this stuff, was treated as if he was some crazy person when he came forward because same guy who wrote the book War is a Racket. He was popular, he was well liked, and apparently the billionaires never read his book or didn't think he was serious and thought it was just a way to make money. Um, they tried to recruit him to lead the coup, the fascist coup, and he played along, pretended he was interested, got names, dates, funding sources, these kind of things, and then brought it to Congress, the House Committee on Un-American Activities, I think it was, or the something like that, like the House committee specifically to look into allegations of treason, stuff like this. And he brought forth and he said, these are traitors. They're trying to do a fascist coup. Here's all the names, dates, information. And then, of course, the plotters abandoned the coup because they knew they had been caught red handed. And they pretend the whole thing was a joke and no one went to jail. So the United States was starting to, by that point, argue it was a democracy that was in great danger of no longer really being a democracy in 1932, 1931. I think business pause 32 in Hoover's Lame Duck, or maybe it's, yeah, not 31. So 1932, the U.S. was barely a democracy anymore, and fascist coups could be plotted. And FDR did repair democracy somewhat, so it was better by the end of his presidency, but then it got worse again. Um, it definitely isn't one today. We live in an oligarchy. There's no question money buys politics. And so the ruling class cuts welfare systems consciously, knowingly, so that people will be desperate. So disabled people will be treated horrendously, for instance, so people will look at them, think they're somehow lazy because they're encouraged not to empathize. Goes back to the high levels of psychopathy. And by pointing at the disabled, people are victims of racism and sexism and so forth. Transgender individuals, LGBTQ individuals who often face employment discrimination. By pointing to the poor, they can say, look, you don't want to end up like that. Do you? You better do what I want you to do, work for whatever I offer you, not make trouble, not try and form a labor union, not demand better pay or working conditions. And of course, union bashing is illegal, by the way, but it's still going on like crazy. And people get stuck doing shit. They get stuck working nights that kills them, even when they're highly educated. I mean, maybe some people have to work certain jobs at nights. I worked as nights at time as an EMT, and I understood that was necessary, and I wasn't so pissed about that. But and that was a job that helped me towards getting to med school with clinical hours. But doing it as like a retail person at a 24-hour, it's not something I should have had to do after grad school. Our country should have been like in the Soviet Union, where after you graduate college, the government would free of charge help you move wherever you wanted. There was a matching program for jobs around the entire USSR, including Warsaw Pact areas like the Baltic states, and based on exam scores at the time of graduation, you would take like exams, and the highest scores would get their pick of where they wanted to go, and then lower scores could pick from what's left. You'd rank preferences, and you get matched. And people, of course, don't understand this in the West, or they try to say, oh, it didn't really work, it was corruption, the bureaucrats' kids got better placement or something. It's not true, generally. There's not evidence of that. Maybe one or two famous examples of corruption, which were actually the exceptions that prove the rule of how the system normally worked. Um, it was a good system, and actually not that dissimilar to how the U.S. Army does rankings and matchings of preferred specialty in the Army after you do Army ROTC. If you one of the highest, they rank every cadet in the country. I actually knew someone who was in the top 10. I won't give the number, or it would really tell who it was to a doxer. I knew one of these guys because by like the last year, you're already ranked, so that you have some idea what like they rank you in at the end of your third year in ROTC. After you like do this big thing where you go and do field exercises under instructors who are rating you, and the highest ranked people basically get their pick of where they're going to go and what they're, well, not so much where they're going to go, but what they're going to do. But, choosing your specialty gives, of course, some influence of where you'll end up, because certain specialties tend to go, but they get their pick of specialty. Just like in the Soviet Union, you got the pick of where you're going to go if you were one of the 10 highest ranked exam scores in the country. It was a meritocracy, a real meritocracy, unlike this bullshit we have in capitalism, where no matter how hard you work in school, your opportunities are limited by your financial means, by your connections. There's no program to help young new graduates relocate to other jobs in their field. Even if we're not going to match people with jobs, there could at least be a relocation program. Other countries sometimes have those, even capitalist countries, and Spain has an apprenticeship program, so they relocate people around the country. At least they help give some financial assistance with that, and they help match people with internships that are subsidized, where the government pays like 70% of your salary for like the first year. Um, it's basically, they call it like an internship or apprenticeship program. At least they did maybe they've cut this program thanks to austerity or something, but they had a program like this. So programs in Spain is not exactly a socialist country. So programs like this have existed. Spain, it had a fascist period after the Spanish Civil War where Franco, and it's a more right-wing country if anything, but these programs exist. They've existed, they continue to exist in some places, and the fact they don't in the United States is just a travesty, an example of how in this country the ruling class don't give a shit, and they get away with it because we're not a democracy. And people like me get screwed. Now someone with long COVID who's desperate, who's trying to survive, is trying to get a YouTube channel to where it makes money, where you have enough subscribers that I can monetize and get enough views and such that I make enough ad money that maybe I can go to Europe, flee this country before it becomes fascist. I live in the United States, of course. Because if I can support myself off my YouTube channel, maybe the countries that won't let a disabled person because they can't support themselves will say, oh, well, even though you can't work normal jobs, you managed to scrape together a living off YouTube. So I guess we'll let you flee here as a political refugee from what you fear is becoming a fascist country. And I believe there's a very reasonable chance that history will show my fear is correct. I give it at least a 1 in 10 chance, which that's odds I'm willing to. It's better to look like an idiot than to be stuck in a country that's fascist, if it goes that way. So I get screwed. Others like me get screwed, and we get screwed so that people can point to us and say, "Look at that poor person. They brought it on themselves. You must work harder for me. I worked harder than anyone you know." And because of a damn virus and a government that's not doing shit to invest in a cure, the United States is putting almost nothing into curing long COVID. There was an attempt to put more money into it, like Bernie Sanders helped champion the bill, and who's that guy, Tim Kaine, who ran as Hillary's vice president candidate. He developed a very mild form on COVID, so of course he helped sponsor the bill in the Senate. There was like a House and Senate version, but it didn't pass, as far as I know. It was called the COVID Moonshot, and it would have put a lot of money into. I couldn't find anything of it. Like I kept searching news articles, which must mean it didn't pass because bills that pass usually get more news coverage, and ones that just get buried, they disappear like this. Um, and I would have seen some evidence that it passed if it had. All I saw was a few news articles from when it hit the House and Senate, and then nothing. Which, of course, they just blocked it. They probably refused to even bring it to a floor vote. Some of the members of the House and Senate, because they're greedy fucks and they would rather let people die a death of despair or literal starvation because they can't make their um, meet their basic needs. There may be a food stamps program, but if you don't have housing, there's nowhere you can put food. And if the government welfare programs won't provide you a roof over your head when you're disabled, find excuses not to pay people enough to even make rent out while they're disabled, even if they were on the verge of or in an incredibly lucrative career before, you'll end up starving on the streets someday. Because, especially with digestive issues, I have to be on a special diet, the FODMAP diet, just so I don't basically shit out everything I eat. So I would definitely, without housing, not be able to make that diet and would starve, literally starve, because our country doesn't give a shit because it's evil. Even though I was about to be a physician, if I hadn't gotten sick, I would be a physician now. Did everything I could to do what was right, to work hard, to check the right boxes. Got fucked by a lot of bad luck. Still was almost going to make it, and then this stupid virus, another bit of bad luck. Government doesn't give a shit. And I also had a pre-existing condition, probably was not diagnosed, but the doctors are trying to figure out what specifically I had. So I had something, just hadn't figured it out. It was still a medical mystery. It was probably genetic, so I got screwed even more ways. And that certainly wasn't my fault. Uh, like I said, this would, of course, if you're into politics, because everything does, um, especially when you're disabled, especially when you're getting fucked over by society, that is deeply political. Um, care about other people. Think about more than just yourself, and do not think that those are worse off than you deserve it. They don't most of the time. Our society tries to blame the victim, because if you blame the victim, you create a society that lacks empathy, that's easy to manipulate and control, to use fear, threats, and rewards, carrot and the stick, to control people, to run an oligarchy, to make the rich richer, and work people to the bone right up until AI has replaced all the jobs. And then they'll turn even on the people who are the privileged few. Many of them, the middle class will shrink drastically. AIs will also enable new methods of oppression as they get more powerful. And they already are starting to, more types of surveillance and such. AIs definitely are already helping with mass surveillance that mean you don't need as much of the population loyal to you, and you can reduce almost everyone to the edge of starvation, and they will. The ruling class, the billionaires, will do that over generations, but they will. Uh, if you stay with capitalism, you're fucked. If you don't care about other human beings, even if you get rid of capitalism, you are fucked. The only way we as humans survive in this world together, especially in the age of nuclear war, especially in the age of climate change, is if we stick together, care about each other, work collaboratively to solve these big issues. And that was my talk. I hope you all enjoyed. Take care of each other. Be kind to yourselves. And may you always find a guiding star to lead you home. Adieu.